Another part of AAFT's campaign is to generate outrage against the soda tax by calling it a tax on groceries. It is not a tax on groceries. It's just a tax on one class of foods, sugary drinks. But by shifting the focus, the group stands a better chance of getting people, especially low-income people, to oppose the tax. To kill Michael Nutter's proposal in Philadelphia, the Pennsylvania Beverage Association created a coalition with local businesses, including owners of bodegas throughout the city, and even a labor union, the Teamsters, because its members delivered sodas to stores, restaurants, and schools. The coalition conducted a fear-mongering campaign, arguing that the tax would ruin small business owners and lead to layoffs in the beverage and transportation industry. In other words, it would be a job-killing tax. In the weeks leading up to the Pennsylvania City Council's vote on the proposed beverage tax, the beverage industry mounted a full-court press, including sending the spokesman for the American Beverage Association to Philadelphia to plot strategy, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer. Lobbyists, according to the Inquirer, are buttonholing city council members. Trade groups and unions have locked arms. Industry ads are sprouting on the air and in print, extolling the good corporate citizenship of soft drink companies. The public has weighed in with hundreds of calls and emails. The strategy worked. In May 2010, despite being millions of dollars short in paying for city services, council members voted down the tax, but approved a budget with a projected $130 million shortfall. To help close the budget gap, the council voted to raise property taxes by about 10%. But Nutter said even that wasn't enough revenue to avoid cutbacks. He also said after the defeat of the proposal that the city would have to cut police, fire, and library services and eliminate 339 jobs. Nutter blamed the beverage industry's intense PR and lobbying campaign for the demise of the proposed tax and the need to lay off city workers. Quote, "They will literally attempt to do or say anything to prevent what is essentially a good idea," he told the Philadelphia Daily News. The beverage industry's win in Philadelphia was just the latest in a string of victories. The proposed tax in Washington succumbed the same week. Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake saw her proposed tax stall in City Council. The only place, in fact, that the industry did not prevail was in Washington State, which approved an excise tax on soda. But as of the writing of this book, lobbyists were trying to persuade legislators there to repeal it. In Washington, D.C., Councilwoman Shea summed up the situation well in a Washington Post story before the vote. Quote, "It's hard to fight a multi-million-dollar PR effort from Big Soda." Indeed, the same article quoted Ellen Valentino, Executive Vice President of the Maryland, Delaware, D.C. Beverage Association, as saying that her group was prepared to spend, quote, "whatever it takes to defeat the tax." And they do. And I read that because that's what they do. They do whatever it takes to win, whether it's ethical or not. And I read that in particular because of the passage there about the threat that if that were passed, that jobs would be lost. That's a common tactic. That's straight from the playbook that I write about in the book. You may have noticed or heard that the Republicans' bill to repeal the health care reform bill that was proposed, was going to be voted on next week, but apparently they're postponing it, or this week, was called, and this is true, a bill to repeal the job-killing health care reform bill. Some PR guy like me wrote that, there's no doubt. That was a 2-page bill, and undoubtedly it was not written by a lawmaker but by a PR guy, and using the terms straight from the playbook to try to get people more afraid of this legislation. And it was just a continuation of the fear-mongering campaign that the industry mounted back when I was still working for the industry. I left, as Ollie said, in 2008, but I was, in 2007, part of the effort to try to develop the strategy to blunt the passage of a real health care reform bill. My first task, though, in 2007, was to help discredit Michael Moore in the movie Sicko, which I described in a book called The Campaign Against Sicko. That movie came at a time when the industry's pollsters were telling us that for the first time ever, and these pollsters have been doing polls for the industry for many, many years, from before the Clinton years. For the first time, more than half of the Americans being polled said that they felt that the government needed to play a significantly greater role in our healthcare system than ever before. Well, this alarmed the healthcare industry, as you can imagine. And this was coming from a pollster who wouldn't pull any punches. He is Bill McInturff, who has been a long-time Republican pollster as well. And his company, Public Opinion Strategies, has done work for the insurance industry and did the polling for the McCain-Palin campaign as well. And of course, the work that he does for the industry is shared with others as well. But that was of great concern to the industry, and it was of concern especially because Michael Moore's movie was coming out that very same summer. This was in May that we heard these polling numbers, and Michael Moore's movie was being filmed initially at the Cannes Film Festival in France in late May, and the first screening in the U.S. was going to be in June in Sacramento. So the industry sent a spy from Washington, who was on the staff of America's Health Insurance Plans, to the film festival to take notes and call back after the film was over to tell us all of us who were waiting on a conference call line what was in the movie. And when we heard what was in the movie, we knew our work was cut out for us. Not only did we have to discredit Michael Moore, but we had to disabuse people in the U.S. that the film was factual. And if you've seen the movie, you know that he talks about, or he portrays people who have insurance, but who have, for one reason or another, been denied care that they need. And folks, that's an ever-growing problem in this country. We heard recently that the latest statistics show that we now have more than 50 million, almost 51 million people who don't have insurance, more than the whole entire population of Spain. But we have a growing problem with people who are underinsured. And that was one of the reasons I left my job, because I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable being a spokesman for an industry that was trying to move more and more of us into inadequate health care plans. They call them consumer-driven plans. That's the euphemism that they came up with to describe these plans that all feature high deductibles. And a lot of people forego the care they need because they can't afford to pay the out-of-pocket expenses they're required to pay by their health insurance companies.